I am Scott Kudelka. I am the Minneopa area naturalist, and I want to welcome you to my classroom. My classroom is the great outdoors. I'm a very lucky person in that way. As a naturalist, my job really is to observe nature and what is happening around us. And sometimes nature provides an unexpected surprise. And as you can see, we are here near the end of October, and we have snow on the ground. Yesterday it started snowing, and we got about 4 inches, and I would expect it will probably be melted in another couple days, and we'll see winter arriving down the road probably in a couple months. As a naturalist, I do mostly, my main focus is programming. What that means is if you want to come out to Minneopa, sometimes we do nature hikes where we'll walk through areas like the prairie, or we have woodland areas, and I'll point out things that I see. We'll talk about the ecosystem around us, or it could be something as simple as a digital photography program where we give you cameras and you go out and you take photos of what you see, and we give you some tips to do better photos and things like that. So that's my main thing, is doing programming. Other things I do range from doing resource work where I help cut buckthorn, which is an invasive species, to working with volunteers as they come out and help us collect prairie seeds and things like that to improve our ecosystem. So the unique thing and why Minneopa was established was 1905 is our double waterfall, which you might be able to hear as we talk. In fact, Minneopa means water falling twice in the Dakota language. The other major attribute that we have is our bison herd. Bison first arrived here as part of the Minnesota Bison Conservation Herd in September 2015. We started out with 11, and currently we have 46. Normally we'll have anywhere from 35 to 40 bison. Other attributes is if you just look kind of around us, we're down at our waterfall area. We have some historical buildings that were made out of sandstone in the 1930s from our Works Progress administration. And probably the other main attribute that we have is our Seppman Mill. That is a 33-foot former windmill that would grind flour from wheat. It was built by Louis Seppman back in the 1860s. The structure is still there, minus the blades. As I said, what I do is I do programming for people. And so what we're going to do here today is we're going to talk about animal tracks and signs. This is something that you can easily do in your backyard. You probably will see things that you never have seen before. I always use a great example is a squirrel's nest. So squirrels build their nest out of leaves. And what's really crazy, people see these, especially after this time of the year, after the leaves have dropped, and they think, well, it's a bird's nest. But birds do not build their nest out of leaves. So that is a great animal sign. They're built by squirrels. And of course, another great sign of a squirrel is look for acorns and stuff like that as they're trying to gather. So I have some props here just to talk about things that you can do or look for when you're talking about animal signs and things like that. I have a couple furs. So when I'm talking about a great sign of animals is their fur. Think about a white-tailed deer. As a white-tailed deer will start to shed their fur, especially in the spring of the year, you'll see little pieces of fur here and there. So that again is a great sign of an animal that has been here. Because a lot of times when we're out in the woods or even in our backyard, as soon as we step out, what happens? The animals disappear. They get frightened from us. So really a lot of times all we are going to do is see their signs and things like that. Another great sign of a deer, of course, is their antlers. Males have antlers and they'll shed them in the fall of the year. In fact, people do things, they'll go out and collect shed antlers. And then actually on this antler is another great sign of an animal. As you can see, the chew marks. So this is some sort of rodent chewing, so they get good calcium from there. So a lot of times, especially in state parks, we tell people just leave the antlers alone because other animals will use them. And then what you'll see with our deer, especially at this, when we get snow on the ground, which is a great time for looking for animal signs, is they'll start be eating those leaves underneath, and so they have to get through that snow layer. And then another sign, of course, of a deer is everybody has to pee. So that's a great sign. And then for bucks, before they lose their antlers, they'll rub on trees. Sometimes it's to for their the velvet on the antlers, and other times, of course, it is to mark their territory. And then I don't have any deer scat, but what I do have here is some coyote scat. And so what's really interesting with this coyote scat is that it really is just fur and little bones. That's all it is. There's no smell to it. It's whatever they can't digest, so it's not gross as we might think of our own scat. And you'll see this like on a trail and places like that. So it's a good sign again that the animal was there. It's a good sign of maybe what they're eating. Looks like they're probably eating a lot of rodents and things like that. And then of course tracks. Tracks are great. And what I have here is a couple rubber tracks. This is for bison. Of course they leave a big one. And then a familiar track that we see all the time is deer. And what we'll do is we'll show you by putting them in the snow to show you what this kind of the sign that they leave behind. And then going on that same thing, I'm just going to talk about probably the animal that leaves the most signs behind, and that is the beaver. And beavers, you know, if you find a water source, most likely you're going to find a beaver. We have beavers throughout here in Minnesota. We have beavers actually on Minneopa Creek as you get down towards the Minnesota River. And then we have beavers in a pond near the Minnesota River. So one good sign is what we call their food cache. And this is actually tree branches and limbs that they have cut. And what they have done is they root it into the bottom of wherever their pond is. And then during the winter, they'll come out of their lodge, they'll grab a branch, and then they'll put it back into the lodge and they'll eat it. So this is what they're going to eat over the winter. And all they're chewing on is really the bark. And then a great sign of a beaver, of course, is some of them build dams. Not all, but some, or at least most anyway. And a dam is to make sure that the water ponds behind a certain area, and they want about 4 feet. And so we call them really the only other animal besides us that can change the environment around them. And the way they do that, of course, is by building that dam. And what they want is that 4 feet of water because they're going to be building a lodge. And so sometimes these lodges are really big and sometimes they're smaller. But what they're looking for is 4 feet of water to prevent other animals from coming into their lodge. Another good sign, of course, what do beavers do? They chew. And so they chew down trees. We have some of these down along our Minneopa Creek. What's really crazy is sometimes they build canals. So again, they're changing their environment. And the question is always, why a canal? Well, I always say, is it easier to drag trees on land or is it to swim with them in water? And of course it is to swim with them in water. In Colorado, they built one that was 750 feet long and a yard deep.
Wow.
And then of course they do have those trails and runways. And that's where they're bringing their trees from a longer area back towards their dam and their lodge. And then of course you have their tracks. And of course the beavers are easier to identify because their tracks of course have web between their feet. Like any other aquatic mammal like an otter or mink. And then this one is my favorite. This is called a scent mound. So what beavers do, they build these mounds of mud and other debris. And this is marking their territory from other beavers. And then they use gland behind their tail that secretes this smell that makes sure other beavers stay away. And so that would be another sign, just that kind of smell from it. Or the other sign would be, you hear that on the water, then you know that a beaver is feeling threatened or wanting to tell their other beavers that there's danger, and so they'll slap their tail on the water. So my challenge is for you to go out in your backyard, see what kind of signs you might see. Look for signs like a cottontail rabbit, red or gray squirrel, white-tailed deer. And then once you kind of get a feeling for your backyard, then travel to a place like Minneopa State Park or a county park or a city park and look for other signs. Example here, of course, we have a bison herd, so that's a great way to go look for signs, but we also have coyotes that move through, and we can see mink down in our water, and of course we have beaver. So this is your activity, is to look for animal signs out in the great outdoors. So the first thing what you want to do is maybe measure them, because what you're going to do is you're going to probably go to the internet or get a good guidebook, and what they'll ask for you is the measurement. Because if you think about canines, so we have a coyote and fox, their feet are probably going to look very similar, but one is going to be longer than the other. So that's going to kind of give you an idea whether it's a fox or a coyote. Same thing is if you're up farther north, and if you have elk and deer, again, you're going to have hoofed animals that are going to have similar prints, but one is going to be bigger, the elk, compared to the deer. So guidebooks and the internet is a great place to go look. The other one, of course, is a naturalist like me. And I can help answer those questions. You can send me an email and I can tell you either what it is or help you go through that process of finding out what it is. We had a few things also on the table that I wanted to talk about. Of course, we had our shed deer antler. The other thing I have over here is actually a turkey's foot, which is really interesting. They have these sharp claws. That's for scratching when they are looking for food and things like that. Of course, birds evolved from dinosaurs, and really when you look at that scaly thing along their leg, it really does look like it might have been a dinosaur's foot almost. But they make great tracks, as you're going to see. The other thing I had on here, this is a gray fox. We have gray fox around here. What's really interesting about this canine is that it's the only canine that can climb a tree. And how they do it is they can maneuver their front legs to almost like hug the tree, and then they use their back legs and they kind of shimmy up. But it's the only, again, canine that can climb a tree. The other thing I have here is a beaver pelt. These beaver pelts are great if you want to stay warm. And of course, they need that really inner fur to provide that, because they're going to go into the water even during the winter. And then I actually have a beaver jaw. And so you can see their teeth. They have to have that sharp orange enamel that provides them the ability to chew down or chop down trees. And if they're like a rodent, so if they're not chewing on the tree or not chewing on something constantly, those teeth continue to grow, and they would actually grow up into their mouth parts. So what we got here is actually our bison herd. Our bison, like I said, are numbering right now at 46. We started out this spring with 30. We had 13 calves, and then we brought in 3 from Mound State Park. And our herd normally should be about 35 to 40. And they're part of this Minnesota Bison Conservation Herd that was started in order to maintain the genetics of a wild herd. And our bison are about 100% or as close to 100% bison as you can get. Well, right now we're standing in front of the Seppman Mill. This mill here was built, like I said, they started in 1862, Louis Seppman. He finished up around 1864. It was a windmill that ground flour into wheat or wheat into flour. And there would have been blades that actually came almost down to the ground, and that would have powered that machinery inside to take that wheat, take the chaff off it, and to ground it into flour. He operated the windmill until about 1890. The problem with the windmill was the blades. They were basically a wood frame with canvas, and if you can imagine, any sort of windstorm would actually rip it off. And that's what happened to him a number of times. And then finally, by 1890, it wasn't worth the effort to continue to utilize the mill. We're actually pretty lucky that we still have it here. It needs some work, but it's, considering it's over 150 years, it's still standing.